Good morning, Allison.
There.
Hello, Allison, can you hear me? I see you. Well, while you're adjusting um, your connection into our segment today, let me just continue with introducing all of our audience members. For those of you who have enjoyed our content, who have continued to follow us, thank you for your interest. Thank you for your loyalty. And by the way, don't be shy. If there's something that you feel like you want to hear more from us, through all of the relationships that we have together, feel free to message us and share with us what matters to you. So, all of that being said, while Allison is trying to come back into the studio here, I will continue. My name is Bill. I am one of your co hosts of this segment called Leave It to the Experts. And with me today, we have the pleasure of inviting and having our first, our first female guest. Her name is Octavia Reese. And before I add her to our studio to introduce her to the rest of you, let me bring Allison back in. Allison, all right, wonderful.
Woo! Take two. Here we go.
I ran solo with you for a while, so I'm glad you reconnected back in.
I'm back. I'm back. My AirPods are dead, so we're gonna just do it old school.
Yeah, well, hey, if your AirPods are dead, that means yesterday was a good day for you. You were on the phone quite a bit.
There you go. I like that
Yeah.
spin.
All right, so let's bring our guest, Octavia Reese, into the studio. Hello.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you
Hey.
for sharing your time with us. So, Octavia, as I joked with you earlier, you and Allison know each other. You guys have a relationship. So I'm your new friend in your ecosystem. So again, thank you for sharing your time with us early on this Tuesday morning.
No problem.
For our watchers and audience members, I'd like to warm you up. I'd like to warm you up with what I call maybe the simple hard question. And that is, in 60 seconds or less, give all of us a big picture view of who is Octavia Reese.
Sure. I will say Octavia Reese resides at the intersection of data analytics, creativity, and humanitarianism. I am a digital health solutions expert. I am an author, artist, and cellist, and therefore a multi-potentialite, which is my word of the year. And as a multi-potentialite, all of my different skill sets and interests all feed into each other to ultimately make me who I am.
Wow. You must have a different clock than the rest of us.
A lot of people say that. I don't know that I do. I think, honestly, I was recently diagnosed with ADHD. And, we know ADHD to be attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I wouldn't say that I'm hyperactive. I don't really fidget. I don't, do the things that we imagine small children with ADHD to do. But when I was being assessed for this invisible disability, um, my doctor said, I wish we called it something else. I wish we called it attention regulation disorder, because it's not that I can't focus. I hyper focus on things that really have my attention, and time moves differently in those spaces. It feels like I can get 30 hours of work done in 10 hours, because when I'm really in the zone with something, it's amazing what my brain lets me do.
Well, I got to learn your secret, okay? And
Sure.
we'll save that for a one-to-one conversation.
Sure.
Um,
Just,
I love how
feel
you describe, who is Octavia Reese. So my first question, Octavia, is this. Here's what I think I know. It seems that learning, training, development is trending up in almost every organization. Why is that?
I think, and this is just my opinion, is that culturally, we are stepping into a mindset where instead of winning and losing, you're winning and learning. And that's my personal philosophy, is that I love making mistakes, because when I make a mistake, it's an opportunity to learn something new, to learn some new skills, to make some changes and not do the same thing twice. And so I feel like, um, in order to retain quality talent, there has to be an investment into professional development, into making sure that your employees are aware of what's happening within the company and moving forward and growing their skills as the company grows. You don't want to lose and leave your employees behind. Now, I tend to do focus more rather than internal learning and development, but on external. So I'm more focused on our users understanding and retention of different products that the company might use, and different adoption techniques for users that are learning new skills, specifically with respect to healthcare software.
Wonderful, wonderful. Tell me more about instructional design. I know that's one of your many skills, and your background in healthcare. How did you get started in this?
Oh my goodness. It's kind of been a lifelong dream for me. I actually went to college with a full scholarship, and I was going to double major in mechanical engineering and cello performance. So I don't know why I thought that was possible, but I did. I was young and ambitious. And I wanted to design prosthetics. But
Okay.
I have the type of brain where high school was very easy for me, and I didn't have very, very quality study skills. So physics, college level calculus based physics, really threw me off. And I was like, I don't want to study this hard. It's a lot of work. I don't want to do this. So I changed my major to French and classical studies, and I minored in music, emphasizing in cello performance still. And that's what I did for all of undergrad, was a lot of languages
Wow.
and ancient civilization and music. And it wasn't until after I graduated that I really missed science and I really missed healthcare. So I ended up being a post-bac pre-med.
Wow.
So then I started doing all my prerequisites all over again, all of the biology, chemistry, organic chemistry, statistics, all that really good nerdy stuff. And then I finally got into my graduate program at Midwestern. I was going to first get a master's of medical science doing microbiology and laboratory clinical research. And then they had a matriculation agreement where they said, if you really want to be a physician, you're guaranteed an interview if you get into this master's program and you have all your other basic requirements to apply. So that was my goal. And I finally got in there. And my husband at the time said, I don't know why you want to do all this clinical medicine stuff when you could just be happy ironing my pants. And I was like, huh, yeah, I didn't think I married this kind of guy, but apparently I did. And so that was a really huge turning point for me, because I let him have his one. I did drop out of my graduate program, but I also moved out, and I knew that I could not thrive as an individual in that type of family setting. And so for the last decade I've been reinventing myself for how do I stay relevant in healthcare? How do I employ and engage and develop all of my natural skills and talents without actually being a clinician with my hands in the patients? And that's where I got into it. All started with my Epic experience. I was a donation specialist working in the world of procurement,
Oh, wow.
organ procurement, and I would be dispatched to any hospital in the state of Illinois between Springfield and Rockford, and including Northwest Indiana. So I was constantly in the car all over the place, being dispatched to end of life situations where I had to not only sit with families in a very tender moment, but then also talk to them about organ procurement and the possibility of helping their loved one let other people's loved ones live longer. But then also using these electronic health record systems and being
Mhm.
able to assess the donation viability of our potential donors. So I had to be fluent in all of these electronic health record systems across all these hospitals, no matter where I was sent. And that led me to becoming certified in Epic OpTime, which is an EHR system specifically focused on surgery and anesthesia.
Yeah, I know a lot of large medical centers, hospitals have implemented, adopted, Epic to be specific. So that's as much as I know about it through some of my physician friends and clients. So right on, you certainly have a 360-degree view. Um,
Yeah.
Now, question for you, because I immediately feel how multi-skilled and talented you are, and you have that blend of left brain and right brain. For our audience members and for those who may be watching today's episode for the first time, um, what would you share as to why it's important for those young girls and boys to make sure that they create the best blend of left brain and right brain for themselves?
I always say that it is one of the things that makes me uniquely good at what I do.
Yeah.
Because I never hyper focused on one thing. Throughout my whole life, people have told me, you do too much. You have to pick one thing. If you want a career, you can't be a physician and a cellist. You have to pick one and focus on that one thing. But I think that it is because I have continued to nurture all of my interests and talents on both sides of my brain that I'm better at all of them. So, for example, instructional design is one fraction of what is my true passion and wheelhouse, which is human-centered empathetic experiences. And that is experience design, that is problem solving, that is solution strategy, that's looking at something that's complicated, looking at data to define what is a problem, maybe where budgets are hemorrhaging money, maybe where the quality of patient care is declining, maybe where there is a rise in infection rates in a hospital. Whatever the situation is where I have been asked to look at data and figure out what the root cause is, it is because I wear so many hats that I'm not afraid of a blank canvas. So I can look at the data and reimagine maybe a solution that hasn't been tried before. It also lets me really engage those empathetic, human-centered design skills, because I've done so many different things and I think so many different ways that it's easy for me to put myself in that user's in the user's shoes and really help flesh out a journey diagram that's really from that first person perspective. And so I think it engages my empathy, where, for example, with instructional design, right? I might be making micro learnings. I might be making videos and e-learnings. A lot of times we overlook the idea that you might need captions because not everyone has the same hearing abilities. That's empathetic, human-centered design. What about all listeners? What about all learners? What about people that don't learn very well from reading and they would prefer to listen to a lesson? And so thinking about all of those different factors, it helps me stay engaged and keep including different types of people and users in the data set that might normally be excluded.
Yeah, wonderful. I knew there was a great reason, or I should say, a great set of reasons when Allison hit me up 4 weeks back and said, I've got a perfect friend, a relationship with someone. I think she needs to guest in one of our episodes. And as soon as she shared with me your LinkedIn profile, I'm like, right on, girl. Let's make it happen. Let's try to squeeze ourselves in her busy schedule.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So all of that being said, Allison, let me hand the baton off to you so that you can wrap up with some more questions for us to learn more about Octavia.
Yeah, so a couple of things as Octavia is speaking about exactly where her skill set applies in healthcare. I want to point out something to some of our audience members who may not understand this. You might be asking yourself or saying to yourself, like, this is so granular. How does this matter on a larger scale? And if you put yourself in the shoes of a hospital administrator or a healthcare delivery system administrator, the reason why to them this matters so much now as opposed to maybe about a decade ago is because one of the things now that hospitals are evaluated on is patient satisfaction scores. And there are so many things that weigh into a patient's total experience or the family member of a patient's total experience while they are, in that healthcare system. So whether it's feeling like they're being seen and heard by the staff, whether it's feeling that complex healthcare information is being delivered to them in a way that they can easily digest as a layperson, or whether it's feeling like they have access to healthcare providers and ancillary staff whenever they need them. All of these things, which Octavia has her hands in while working with these really complex data systems, all of these things ultimately translate to a patient's personal experience in the hospital and the rating that they're going to give that hospital. Yeah. When they get a survey at discharge and they're asked to provide feedback on their experience as a patient, that has a direct impact on reimbursement for that hospital. Yeah. So it's unfortunate that it kind of comes down to the almighty dollar to motivate hospitals and healthcare systems to do a little bit better. But money is obviously an incredibly motivating factor. And that's a big part of the reason why the types of roles that Octavia has held are so incredibly important now more than ever.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, okay, a couple of questions, and I'm kind of like switching gears a little bit here. And maybe this just comes from my perspective of knowing you a little bit outside of the work realm. I think what kind of is making Bill's brain explode a little bit and made my brain explode as I first got to know you is this concept of like, how can you be so well developed in both sides of your brain and have this immense creative talent that you continue to pour yourself into, but then you're also technologically on the cutting edge. So do you find that either from due to pressure from external sources or just your own preferences of how you conduct yourself in a work setting, do you feel like you tend to keep your creative / artistic endeavors separate from who you are as a data analyst, or do you feel like those are kind of routinely intersecting and interplaying when you're dealing with patients, with surgeons, with hospital staff, with IT personnel?
Yeah, I think they're constantly interplaying, like you said. I have a few examples. One of them is when I was working in organ procurement, one of the training points that we were so heavily influenced on was how to establish and develop a rapport with the physicians that are assigned to the patients that we're evaluating. And so often I would be out in the field when I was fresh there, and I would have a preceptor, and they would say, okay, well, don't come at a doctor like this, and don't come at a doctor like this. And, they're kind of guiding me on how to. And so I'm going to be quiet and let them educate me, not letting them know that, I'm basically a med school dropout and I have physicians that are peers, right? So I'm not even intimidated by the idea that they're doctors. But in this one case, the attending came over, and I looked at him and I was like, Josh plays viola, and we were in an orchestra together. And so we had a personal connection, because here's another person who works in healthcare and also is a musician. And so that let us have a completely different rapport, a completely different exchange around not only ourselves and the business, but also this patient and their family. And I already had that close connection with the attending, which is something that my colleagues would have had to fight for in a different situation. So that's sort of on the personal end of where it comes from. But I'm going to go back to another example that I have that ties into what you were talking about, Allison, with patient satisfaction. I was doing some research around the city of Chicago, and and some of the recent healthcare statistics. And there is a website where you can pull a ton of data about hospital performance, and especially I'm specifically personally interested in health equity and how our different communities of color and gender groups are experiencing the healthcare system in Chicago. And so I was looking at specifically where money is lost in our healthcare system, and it's lost in the emergency room. The emergency department is just a huge place of the rising cost of care, because you have people with preventable illnesses that are not preventing these illnesses, and they wait until they compound and expand and get worse and worse and turn into these complex comorbidities. And then they're going to the emergency department in really life-threatening, complex situations that require a whole lot of emergent, urgent, complicated solutions, right? Expensive solutions. So I'm looking at it from going backwards.
Mhm.
What is this data telling me? How are we getting so many preventable visits happening in the ER? So then I narrowed it down. There's a few different branches where it could go down, but one of them was specifically preventable illness and who has access to primary care. And then I looked at the demographics, and it's very equal between white Chicagoans and Chicagoans of color. Almost everyone has equal access to care, which I wasn't expecting, but the data is telling me the truth, right? The data is saying everybody seems to have a PCP, a primary care physician. So then I looked into the patient satisfaction data. White Chicagoans were very satisfied with their care. Chicagoans of color were not satisfied with their care. They had a completely different experience in the healthcare system, which ultimately, from what the data showed, they don't go back to these PCPs. Do they have access? Yes. But do they have a rapport? Do they have a trusting relationship? Are they compliant? Are they on board? Is it a collaborative treatment process? No. Totally different experience between white and Black and brown patients. So then here is where the creative part comes in. Now, what do we do? Now, what do we do to engage these Black and brown patients so that they're not the ones that are coming into the emergency room at knocking on death's door for illnesses that could have been prevented, when the data says that it is a disproportionately high amount of patients of color that are frequenting the emergency department. So I make space for all of that, because I don't believe that I would be able to be as creative with my solutions for coming up to responses with that data analytics if I weren't already used to taking a blank canvas and turning it into a masterpiece, if I wasn't used to already taking random sounds and turning that into a song. I believe that it's my creative side that lets me be even more creative with solutions that stem from a problem that the numbers told me exists.
Mm-hmm. Totally. It makes so much sense. And also the amount of empathy I think that you can tap into as an artist and a creative is just, it's obviously an advantage. And, there are people, to your point earlier, I do want to say it always surprised me as I would get to know the physicians I was working with, how many of them also majored in things like philosophy or languages or literature. And it does seem like, especially with the younger generation of folks coming out of medical school, there is more of this openness towards embracing the artistic world and understanding that it can coexist in a data-driven clinical setting. And I just think you marry those two things so beautifully. It kind of leads to my next question too. The other perspective that you get to hold, which is, it's not entirely unique, but unfortunately it is still relatively uncommon, is the fact that you are a female in this space. And when we talk about disparities in healthcare, and particularly for women of color, we see the maternal fetal mortality rates in this country are much higher for women of color, for instance. So as a woman, how do you feel that you and women in general are uniquely and especially qualified to fill these roles?
Yeah. I want to go back to a few things that you said too, about creativity and empathy. a lot of creative projects, music, art, dance, are coming from a place of deep emotion, right? Whether you are expressing deep pain, sadness, deep love. A lot of our, greatest works are works of love, expressing this deep passion of romance for someone. Um, and that tying into analytics helps me remember that every number is still a person.
Mm-hmm.
Every number and every statistic still represents a human that has their own experience, that has their own pains, that has their own struggles, loves, passions, sadness, depression. All of these numbers are still people. And so the artistic side helps me connect all of those emotions and all of those that empathy to the numbers for the problems that I'm trying to solve. Now specifically with women in being a person of color, looking at the numbers, I mentioned before, a lot of groups that are getting lost. We're getting lost because we're not included in the data set, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're only recently finding out about this high mortality rate in women of color in childbirth because nobody ever cared to track it before. So now that we're tracking it, we're seeing, wait a minute, why are we dying at an exponentially higher rate than white women? What's the root cause? Is it something that is a genetic issue? Is it a cultural issue? Is it a historic mistrust of the healthcare system? Is it a lack of prenatal care? Is it a lack of sex education in our communities? Where does it begin? And it's such a complex question that sometimes we don't even have data to tell us where to go because we were never included anyway. And I really genuinely believe that the best people to have empathy and to have eyes on those groups that are typically ignored are from the groups that are typically ignored.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of white men aren't going to think about what's the experience of a Black woman in this situation because I don't exist to them statistically. I'm not on their radar. They have no empathy for what my journey could look like that's very different from theirs. And so when you pull me into the mix, I'm going to say, hold on. What about women? What about women of color? I'm going to bring in that perspective that may have been completely invisible to the people that have traditionally been setting up our systems and setting up norms and making rules and laws and all kinds of different solutions that never include us anyway. I was for example, I was reading it was like something on the internet, beautiful social media, right? something about what was something that you saw abroad that really blew your mind that we don't do here in America. And the thing that stayed with me was someone said, when I was in, XYZ country, I walked in the bathroom and their handicapped stalls were right by the door. And at first I thought, wow, that's weird. Why is it right here? And then I thought, wait, of course it makes perfect sense. Why would we make our least able-bodied people travel the farthest to use the toilet? And it just seems like common sense, right? When you think about it that way, but it's so normal here in the United States to see the biggest stall at the end of the bathroom or somewhere far away. And I don't think it's about the discomfort of being around someone who's differently abled. I think it's just because the people that made this up, it's not a reality for them. They're not putting themselves empathetically in the role of someone who's differently able. They're saying, okay, well, we have to make space for them, but it's kind of rare. And maybe there's not as many differently abled people as there are abled people. So we'll just put them all the way down there. But then for that one person, why would we make them travel the longest distance when they could just go right here by the door? And that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. When we don't include the people that we're trying to serve in the data set, in the conversations, we're going to make really thoughtless, careless, insensitive decisions that last generations.
Yeah. That's such a good point, Octavia. And it's something that actually my partner, who Octavia knows, Ryan, and I have talked about many times before. Just this idea of how crazy it is now to think about that it was just about 30 years ago that the ADA was passed, and our schools, our our stores, our public spaces had to be reconfigured to accommodate people with disabilities. And it's really hard to wrap my brain around now how that was such an afterthought somehow.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
really, it's kind of shocking and sad. And it's not to say that, there aren't other places in the world who are still falling behind on accommodating people who are differently abled. But that's such a great example that we see in our everyday lives, and how such a simple modification, like putting that stall closer to the door, could mean so much to so many people. So, it's like we're always just learning and growing and trying to do better. But these are all still relatively recent changes.
Yeah.
It's only recently that we're even sort of encouraged to have these conversations in public, like talking about disparities in healthcare and patient experience. I mean, this is all like very new jargon for a lot of people. So it's an exciting time, and it's exciting that you get to be a part of it. My final question for you.
Yes, go ahead. I got really excited. Okay.
Oh, okay. No, go ahead. I don't want to cut you off.
No, I was going to talk about some other like creative and artistic things too, where these two worlds converge, is going back to prosthetics, what I originally wanted to study. There are mechanical engineers out there that are absolutely changing the world because they're designing prosthetics of color. Again, it's like, why haven't we been thinking about how to match skin tones? When you think about
Band-Aids, it was like such a huge deal for bandages to all of a sudden be offered in different skin tones. I mean, it seems like such a no-brainer.
Exactly. It seems like such a no-brainer. There is also a medical student somewhere that recently started re-illustrating dermatology books to include images of skin diseases on brown skin, because a lot of brown skin diseases are overlooked because they don't look like the textbook, which never had pictures of our skin in it anyway. And so it's that kind of a thing where it's like, why did we wait this long to do it? Oh, that's right, because we weren't included in those conversations in the beginning.
Yeah.
And as all of us who are sitting here on this podcast represent different ethnic groups and different cultures, which I think is like such a privilege and an advantage, actually. I'm reminded back to like what you said earlier, that so many people in this space simply can't relate. And it's not necessarily malicious. It's not meant to be oversight. It's not meant to necessarily be dismissive, but it's just really impossible to fully relate unless you've walked a mile in someone's shoes.
Exactly.
So that's where it's just very exciting. Even it just kind of dawned on me as I'm sitting here looking at all of our faces. I'm like, hey, look at this panel. This is a little bit more representative of what the country is beginning to look like, what decision makers are beginning to look like, and hopefully what people who are making really big changes are starting to look like. So
right. And I want to add that little disclaimer in there to what you said and tie that up, that this is why diversity and inclusion is so important, because it's not the responsibility of the white majority to think for the rest of us.
Right.
Because we're not on their radar, and we're not saying that we should be, but we need to be in those conversations so that the final product and the final business includes everyone, and it's not exclusive of different voices that weren't invited to the table. So yeah, I think that's so important. So I just want to like release any white people that feel offended right now. We're not saying that you should be thinking for us. Don't think for us. Invite us to the table.
Yes, totally. It's not an either or. This is just meant to open another door that previously was maybe not opened, and say, wow, take a gander out here and see how things are going. Pretty eye-opening, isn't it?
Right on.
Yeah. So I'm gonna squeeze in my last question here, if I may. And this is just, again, kind of going in a slightly different direction, but everything we've talked about between your creative endeavors and what you're doing professionally, so much of that is in service of healing and helping others. And I know somehow you have like 48 hours in a 24-hour day, or at least you make it seem like you do magically. So what do you do for your own self-care? Are you able to even carve out time for such a thing?
I do carve out time. I absolutely love traveling and just getting out of I don't know, the daily norm of my home and this hairy beast that lives. Um, so I am so inspired by different cultures, by learning new things, by trying new foods, by seeing new landscapes. That really, really, really feeds my soul, as well as making time to create without interruption, without the dog or without the kids or without other deadlines. And so I actually applied for a residency back in 2019. That is a Chateau d'Orquevaux. It's in France, and you go to
Wow.
this estate, and they give you a room and a studio, and you just get to create. It's an artist residency. You can create whatever your art is. And I said, I got to do that. I got to get out of the country and go to this beautiful scenic estate. And I just want to paint and make music and write books without anybody asking me to play or feed them. And so I applied and I was accepted. I was supposed to go in July of 2020, and that got postponed all the way until May of 2023. So I'm finally going this year.
Yay!
But
Oh my gosh, Octavia, that's awesome.
yeah, I'm so excited. So it's finally coming up, and that's absolutely where I feel fed is just being out somewhere new, somewhere beautiful, somewhere scenic, somewhere with lots of nature and beauty, and then just being able to just make something out of nothing.
That's so incredible. I'm so happy you finally get to go. I remember you talking about that when we first met, and such a bummer that COVID kind of derailed that for a while, but maybe now is the perfect time.
I hope so. I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh,
That
that's
sounds
great.
like fun. I wish I could come with you.
Yeah.
That would be great.
All right, ladies and audience members, thank you for sharing your time with us. For those of you who are interested to guest in an upcoming episode, feel free to reach out to either myself and Allison, my co-host, and we will gladly entertain the thought of your story in one of our upcoming episodes. For today, ladies, as we wrap up, all of you enjoy your great day as well as your furry friend.
We love
All
Muffet,
right.
our building mascot.